Welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversation. First of all, I want to say thank you to everyone who has gone on like the Facebook page, the YouTube channel, and people who have subscribed. And if you haven't done so yet, come on, get over there, give us a like, make sure you subscribe. Be greatly appreciated. Today, I'm excited about the guests that I have today and about the conversation that we're about to have. So without further ado, I want to invite my friend Rimaz to introduce herself. Rimaz, tell the audience who you are.
Thank you, Dave. Well, my name is Rimaz Abakar, and I was born in Sudan. I came to Canada as a refugee in 2003, and professionally, I am an engineer. I graduated from the University of Ottawa with a degree in chemical engineering, and then I went on to do a master's degree in environmental engineering from Lakehead University.
Awesome. Like, one of the things that I want you to talk about, I remember the first time that I met you at a Toastmasters meeting, and you gave a speech about how you got interested in your education. Would you mind sharing that with the audience? Because I thought I was so inspired and I thought it was such a powerful story. Would you mind sharing a little bit synopsis of that?
You want me to share the story?
Just what inspired you, because I find that fascinating.
Okay, I'm not going to share the full story because if you remember correctly, at the time I got very emotional.
Yes,
I don't want to do that here.
Okay, fair enough.
But actually what inspired me to go into the studies that I went into, which is chemical engineering and environmental, where I grew up, I saw a lot of injustices. As many people know, that the people of south of Sudan, which is separated now to its own country, they have been for a very long time been treated very unfairly. And they still continue to be treated unfairly. And I saw a young boy that was actually drinking from runoff water from one of the restaurants, and it was during a time that there was celebration. There was a huge there's a good time. There should be people more kind to each other and more loving, but that wasn't happening. And as a young child, I really didn't understand that, and it really rattled me. And so later on in my life, the clean water issue became a thing for me. And I think that was a very defining moment for me. So then I come to Canada and I'm thinking of what to study. And I was just really good at math and good at chemistry. And I thought chemical engineering. Yeah. So to my surprise, that's not how it worked. But I still became very passionate about it. And the clean water issue didn't really stop, and it wasn't just a back home issue. Here in Canada, I come to learn and discover that there are people who are still, especially our Indigenous people, still suffering from lack of access to clean water, right? So that kind of just stayed with me, and that I think this is one of the situations that really shaped me in my advocacy when it comes to the environment or to social justice. For sure.
I get goosebumps when I hear stories like that, because I also reflect on my own space that I grew up on. I grew up on a coconut plantation owned by English plantation owners. And I remember the water issue, because you will get water for an hour in the morning and you have to fill up as much as you possibly can. And unless there was rain, that's the water that you had to deal with. So in my household now in Canada, if I hear a pipe dripping, I always go and turn it off, right? So it's fascinating the connection that you have, or how those experiences, influence you as you move forward.
For sure, yeah.
One piece that you mentioned there that I'd like you to touch on, because you talk about coming to Canada and the transition. I remember you sharing a story about having to do like a math test or your first time frame within the classroom. Would you mind sharing that? Because I think that is going to give a lot of insight into the conversation that we're going to have. I think that's a powerful piece.
Sure. I think you're talking about so when I first came to Canada, we were required to do an evaluation test. Is that the one?
Yes, that's the one. Yes.
So the evaluation is basically for academically, so to know where they place you, right? Because not everybody comes from I say it in quotations, certified or acknowledged.
That's right.
Educational institutions, right? And so, coming from one of those non-acknowledged schools from Egypt, we were required to do this evaluation, and I did my evaluation for math, I think, and it was English, and the math one, as I was solving the questions, I was solving them in Arabic and in English, so I was mixing the X, Y, and Z, right? These were the variables, and I was using Sin, Sad, and Jim, I think, which were the Arabic equivalents to those when you're solving math in Arabic.
Right.
So I was alternating between the two because my brain is not yet adjusting to English math, right? Or doing math in English. And so my math teacher went ahead and graded it, and I think he spent a lot of time trying to figure out what, like, my logic and follow it to know this girl knew what she was talking about. And so I was in grade 10 and I was placed in grade 11 math. And so my first day in my grade 11 classroom, I went in, and this is like total movie cliche, but they had a test actually. They had a test, and the teacher said, it's okay, you don't have to worry about it, just, like you can chill just while the kids do their test. And I said, okay, but I can try. So I got the test like everybody else, and I solved it. And to everybody's surprise, I had full marks. And so it became the joke that, like, look at this kid, she just came yesterday and doesn't speak English. And
full marks, you mean that you got 100%?
I got 100%.
Okay,
like,
perfect.
I aced the test.
Just to clarify.
Right? Yeah,
100%,
so like I aced the test.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me like quickly popular in a way between the kids. And I don't know if it was positive popularity or not, because I just came in and I aced the test that a lot of the students struggled with. And I think that's the story you were talking about.
Yes. But what was the feedback? Was it a positive feedback that you aced the test because of your intellectual level? Or was it any suspicious conversation around you doing the test?
It wasn't suspicious. I think the feedback I got from the students was and the teacher said, like, she just came yesterday, literally, and she doesn't speak the language, and she was able to do better. So it was kind of used as to the rest of the students, right?
Right.
And they were all like, well, and I was in grade 10, but only my math was in grade 11. So I was kind of feeling very good about myself that I showed up those grade 11 students, right?
That's awesome.
So it was kind of cool.
That's awesome. My experience wasn't the same. I had an illusion that I was pretty smart.
Oh, okay.
And then I went and I did my, just to check to see where my grade was, and I wasn't even at a grade 8.
Oh, wow.
So but that's actually some of the inspiration for me today. And when I talk to my kids or I talk to anyone, when I realized it was at grade 8, I recognized the work that I needed to do.
Yep.
At that time, they had just started the ACE Online grade 12 program where you can do your grade 12 online. So I had the opportunity to be one of the subjects to try that out. And I actually aced the program to the point wherein I went to Sioux College. I did it at Sioux College, and I committed to do a graphic design diploma. So I finished my graphic design diploma. And then I went to university and finished a university degree in sociology. It is one of the most fulfilling, satisfying thing that I've done in my life, because growing up at home, I hated school, right? It was so for me now, when I talk to people, one thing that I've learned from all of that is that if you want it badly enough, you would do whatever you need to do, but some of us are in privileged space that we don't have to do those things. So thank you for sharing that. That was a very powerful story.
It's amazing how your story is equally, probably even more powerful, because in my education, I didn't have any interruptions, even though I was a refugee, right?
Right.
And so it's just that in the culture I came in, there was the assumption made about a refugee child coming, right? Yeah. From a third world country that definitely I'll be academically behind.
Yes.
So maybe that's the advantage, or the disadvantage rather, that I had, which is being stereotyped or having that, unconscious biases play in people's minds when they're dealing with me. Whereas for you, your barriers were very real. Right? They were very physical and they're very real. And so it's very inspiring to see you, overcome them.
Yes, that's where I developed the commitment from, of the massive gaps that was within my education. Even now, the way I use certain words, right? And that I recognize all the time. that is from the lack of not having those foundations, those gaps that was missing early when you are to build those critical foundations in order to, to be more effective. So, so for me though, as I say to people, that's like that saying, right? Is that you use your mess as your message, right? Yep. So for me, that is one of the things that drives me, that I'm passionate about, and when I talk to people about, how if you are interested, if you want to make a shift, if you want to change your life, you get committed and you can, you can do so if you need to.
You're the driver for sure.
Absolutely. So, this is Courageous Conversation.
Yes.
This is not about talking about all of the comfy thing. One of the things that, since I've met you, that we have always talked about is to get to the point where we can really have some hard conversation. Our conversation today, I'd like us to talk about race.
Okay.
First of all, I wanna send and I did reach out to you and have a conversation.
You did. Thank you.
About all that stuff that happened in London. It is very sad to see that in today's day and age that we are still in these spaces, but we cannot. I don't know the word that I want to use it, but we cannot continue to not have real conversation about the impact of not having real conversation.
Yep.
Because if we look at the increase in hate crimes and hate groups online, and the biggest problem I think we have in a Canadian context is because we would like to believe that this stuff don't happen in Canada.
Yep.
And I just want to give you the opportunity to share any piece that you want as a way to leverage into our conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. First of all, actually, thank you for reaching out. I think you were the second person that reached out to me after Marlene. And I really appreciated that you coming from a mental health space and you offered that support and you reminded me to take care of myself, and I totally appreciate that. And it is heartbreaking, and I'm still, and I keep saying this because I'm still trying to process it, right? We've been dealt too many blows in a very short time, right?
Yeah.
And you know that it's my saying, well, I don't know if I didn't make it, but I always say that we like to maple wash our Canadian history.
Absolutely.
Because it's very naive, very, very naive of us Canadians to believe that we have a gold star history, right? Where if we want to believe that, we're really denying the experiences of Indigenous people.
So much people.
We are denying the experiences of Black people in Canada and slavery in Canada, right? We are denying generations of Japanese and Asian hate and discrimination that it came to the forefront right now, and Islamophobia and all the isms in the world. We're not what's the word? We have them all here.
That's right.
Right? And you pointed exactly to that, is that we don't speak about things.
That's right.
And I think it was the first time in our history for Islamophobia to be spoken about in a federal level, and for terrorism. That's right. For terrorism to be assigned to a non-Muslim.
Yeah. Isn't that something?
That, for me, I think that was a breakthrough that came from this, right? Because historically we have reserved terrorism for Muslims and Islam.
Right.
For the first time to have a white guy being called a terrorist was powerful. And that's the beginning of that conversation, I think, right?
And look what it had to take for that to happen.
Unfortunately.
That for me, when I observe and look at, these type of, hatred and stuff, I want to go back up a little bit and just talk about systematic racism, of how all of this, and I found a quote here today about systematic racism that I had to write down because I love the way it was contextualized, and hopefully that it will build for us to go into a conversation. It says, systematic racism is a series of undocumented, that's key, undocumented policies and procedures that systematically hinders the personal, professional, and socio-economic development of a particular group of people simply because of their ethnicity. Alex, I don't want to mispronounce his last name. Ehoma, I think is his name. I thought is one of the best detailed description I have heard of what systematic racism is. And I just want to, in our conversation around BNC, Black Northern Consulting, and in our training for anti-Black racism training, I am passionate about talking about, because when you come to systematic racism, when you mention it, most people, what do we get? Silence, yep. Denial, right? All of the things that we get. But I find it interesting. I would like us to have a dialogue. I think it's an important place to move forward about talking about intentional social conditioning. Because what I find when we'll have the conversation, I find if you try to talk to a white person about racism, silence, denial, whatever the things that comes up.
Rage.
Rage, because they still don't understand how it was intentionally, how they were intentionally socially conditioned to be racist. Do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I have a lot of things to add. How much time do we have?
Yeah, we got lots of time.
Well, first, I just want to say that when it comes to, I think the distinction of saying undocumented policies and procedures, because you challenge some organizations or some people and they say, well, we don't have a rule that says we can't hire black people. Do black people apply and we didn't hire them? Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, so let's back it up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And then you want to talk about break down systemic racism. But I think the distinction to say that it's undocumented, it's the unspoken policies and procedures that is keeping certain people in certain places.
Absolutely.
And allowing access to certain people over others.
Yeah.
So to me, that's very powerful, and I agree with you. That's a quote that deserves sharing. So thank you for bringing that on.
Yeah.
And to just comment on, I lost my train of thought, I think.
The intentional social conditioning.
Yes, on social conditioning. It's the system, right? You get inducted into the system. When we were speaking to certain individuals a couple of days ago, they were like, oh, we're going to examine our system and see how systemic barriers and racism are in it. And I'm like, are you going to be the one to examine it? Because you're inducted into the system.
That's right.
How are you going to objectively examine it from the outside with my experiences and views to make it and remove those, to make it better and remove those barriers, right? So if people are inducted into a system, they're conditioned into it, it's very hard for them, and that's the power of it, right? And then we can have the conversation about it, so therefore you can't even challenge it.
And that's the point that I always make, right? When they would say things like that, I would always say, but the system protects itself.
Of course.
In my university, time at university, me and one of my professors would always have a back-to-back, right? I would always use this quote by Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde said that the master's tool can never be used to destroy the master's house, right? And my professor used to come back with me and says, but Audre Lorde is the same person that says our diversity, our strength is in our diversity. And I used to say to her, fair enough, but where is diverse? You show me, governmental policy or structure that is diverse. It is still built from and managed from that systematic space of control. So we can use BNC as an example of the work that needs to be done, right? One of the things that is very disheartening for me as we are intentionally targeting certain spaces to have a conversation. And there are a lot of people that is open and want to have the conversation. But as I keep saying, I'm sick of talking, right?
Agreed,
What I like to see is tangible examples that we don't need to say anything about, that they speak for itself.
Yes.
And so for me, education, we know that education is a piece. I got to read another quote because I'm a quote guy. Have you ever heard or seen anything from Jane Elliott?
You want to say yes?
Okay. Jane Elliott had, I thought I put it in here, I had one of the most powerful quotes. What did she say? I'm going to try to do it out of my head because I didn't write it down. She said that something like this, and I might misquote her. She said, racism or hatred is a commitment to ignorance. Mm-hmm. And she said, I'm an educator. I can teach away ignorance.
Yep.
The part that I get disheartened about, whether it's federal government, whether it's agencies, we want to talk about all of these things and say, yeah, we are, blah, blah, blah. But you don't see the policies or anything that, those tangible pieces that I'm saying that reflects it. So an example that I use all the time, in the educational system, we know the way you socially condition people to continue to be racist and perpetuate hatred is by denying those other groups' histories from being taught in school. Yep. So even in today's day and age, right, Black history is not on the curriculum.
Yep.
So how come, so from that space, you're telling me that you're interested, but you can't make sure that it's a policy, that it's a part of the curriculum. Yep. And so for me, that's what I try to say. These are the ways that the system
protects itself.
Protects itself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So I wanted to ask you a question from the perspective, when you talk about your career as a Muslim woman in a male-dominated environment, do you have an experience, or what has been your experience navigating that heightened masculine space? What that has been like for you?
Well,
I could imagine your stories.
I've always joked about. I've kind of have like a collection of isms. I mean, if I wasn't straight, then I would have been like the eighth child, right?
Right,
so, right. Woman, Black, Muslim, hijabi.
Yeah.
Like if there is an ism out there,
got it.
So it's definitely having to be the one of, right? It's either that I'm the only hijabi or the only Muslim, the only Black woman, the only woman. Yeah. So it's always the experiences are around being the only in a space that really the way when I look at it, it wasn't designed with me
none whatsoever
in mind, right? Like at work, that place was not designed with women in mind and not with Muslim women in mind, right? And so it's always been navigating that, and with someone with my personality and I speak up.
Absolutely.
I speak up if something doesn't sit well with me. I speak up. I challenge, and that gets me more trouble than not. But I was also right. But I was also raised to speak up because really all I have is my voice. That's right. And so if I give up that too, then I'm rendering myself hopeless and useless.
Hopeless, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Or helpless rather. So I speak up, and I think that's how I'm able to exist in all these spaces and persist. Like not just exist and shy away, but I exist and I'm here.
Good for you.
So there's no hiding me behind anything, and I think I'm lucky enough that I grew up in an environment where I was always encouraged to be myself.
Yes.
So I never felt the need to, not that I'm rigid, like I mean, I don't think I'm rigid, but I think I have conviction of who I am.
Good for you. Yeah, so
and that I carry with me in places. And so if you don't like it, I don't feel the need to change me so you like it. Is that you got to examine why you don't like the way I am. Why don't you like the way I voice my opinion? Why you don't like the way I dress or carry myself? That's up to you. Examine it if you want. And if you don't, then it's your loss, right? It's the person's loss.
I got to say, that's one of the things that I've admired about you from the time that we met, right? Not that necessarily I even agree with everything that you said, but I admire I admire anyone who has that conviction, who is not afraid of being who they are. I always say that has always been one of my theme for all of my life. I am who I am, and if you don't like me, I'm good with that as well.
Yeah.
I want to back up again, and still talk about the Canadian experience of navigating, as you talk about it from a Muslim perspective, but as a Black woman navigating this Canadian experience. So one of the things that I learned early, if I think about my first the first really impactful racism experience that I had it in Toronto. And I always said it was an out-of-body experience. Because it was the first time I literally was standing over there and looking back at myself. And I said, man, yes, I am black, and that does mean something in this space. And that had put me then on an interesting journey. And the silence still stands out, is the most powerful thing that stands out to me. I mean, the silence comes from this space, I think. For me, I heard someone said the other day, and I keep using this all the time now when we talk. Both realities are present at the same time. And I think if we are to move forward, the first thing that we both have to do is to come to the space and acknowledge that. If you're a Canadian or a white person, I think that we are at a time frame where you can no longer hide behind ignorance.
Yep.
Right? You can no longer hide behind silence. We know. Look at what just was revealed about those 215 children.
Yep.
But the Canadian government and other Canadians say that doesn't happen here in Canada, right?
Yeah. They don't believe, like, oh, we knew the residential schools were bad, but we didn't know. What do you mean you didn't know? I came yesterday and I know, right? And it's not like there is lack of literature or there is lack of knowledge out there. People can find out how to freaking build a rocket these days online, and they can do it. Why couldn't you find out about our Canadian history? So, as you say, like, not knowing is not a thing of the 21st century. It's not an excuse that you can have anymore.
But that's back to what I'm talking about. And I hugely believe in talking to people about the choices you make, right?
Yeah.
When I came to Canada, that was one of the first things that stood out to me when I would hear First Nation people talk about treaty rights and residential school and all that stuff. I'm like, what are they talking about?
What is that all about? Yeah.
Right? And you know what I did?
Yeah.
I started going to the Friendship Center.
Yeah.
When they have different events so that I can learn.
Yep.
Right? When I was at university, I took a little bit of Native studies just so that I could understand. So as a Canadian, or as to be in a position to say, well, I didn't even know. I mean, right now, if you're using such a, you should really stop.
Yeah.
You know?
But it really, David, goes back to what you were saying earlier. Let's look at the educational system and let's see how the residential schools, because who's writing history and who's writing the system, right? Like who's inducting us in this system? You go into the residential schools, you look for them in the educational system. I don't even remember like our civic classes in grade 10 or whatever. It was just like parliamentary stuff and who the queen is and how much who gets paid what for what, and it's socially
conditioning.
And it's all. Don't get me started on the queen. So I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose my citizenship.
We're not gonna go there.
I don't want to lose my citizenship.
And all of that is. I want to always come back to social conditioning, because all of that is socially conditioning you into thinking and being in a certain way.
Yep.
As we talk about that, I have another quote.
Let's hear it.
I can never pronounce this word correctly, so don't hold me to.
Is it one of my words?
No, illiterate, but it's illiteracy, right?
Okay.
So this quote is, the illiterates of the 21st century, right, will not be those who cannot read or write. It will be those who cannot unlearn, relearn, and learn. Alvin Toffler. What we are talking about here as we talk about social conditioning, racism, because we know hatred is taught.
Yes, 100%.
Right? So the challenge Canadians have is, how do you unlearn, right? In spite that, yes, you might not have been aware that you were socially conditioned to these hate, or to not be aware that these type of ism is present. I'll give that to you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But in today's society, where you have access, they were no longer burning down the libraries when, you know, a black person or native people would write something. It's on the net. You can find it everywhere. So that emphasized the point to me that you cannot no longer, you should feel bad when the word come out of your mouth that I don't know.
Yeah, I
Right?
agree. I think that we're accountable. So once something come into your consciousness, so if you read on the news or saw a post being shared, or there is a hashtag Me Too, a hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag, treated, whatever the social issue around you is, and there is some awareness that is being dropped into your consciousness, I think you can be held accountable from that point on. Because especially if something that consciously or not, you benefit from it, you propagate it in a way that even passively being part of it, not challenging it, your silence may contribute to the injustice or oppression against someone. You know what I mean? Like if you are part of that society and there is something that you can do, and that thing is just being aware, because we can't change things that we're unaware of.
That's right.
So I think that's where the accountability comes. Like, have you heard of residential schools? Okay, so now what do you know about a residential? What did you do to find out about residential schools? Because to me, the minute you know about it, you're accountable. You just set an excellent example that you started reading, going to the furniture shop. I actually did the same thing. I knew that there were indigenous people in Canada, but my exposure didn't really become highlighted until I went to Thunder Bay.
Absolutely.
Because the first thing I noticed was in the university there was a different language, or there were other symbols that being used over the English for like doors and or streets and buildings. And I was like to my brother, I was like, "What's that?" And he was like, "Oh, that's I think it was Ojibwe or Anishinaabe writing." And I said, "Oh, okay." And then there was a friendship center right by where the graduate studies were. And so I was like, I just pop in and I'm like, "Hey guys," and like, "Do you want to come?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I just like, and I'm uncomfortable because I don't know. And I don't want to be inappropriate or whatever, right? But I'm curious, I want to know. And this is where my learning started to become, right? And then I became interested in powers and and the meaning of things. Why do people why people are the way they are? Why do people do the things they do, right? And so that's where my learning came. And then when I learned that there's more to it than just they're another nation in Canada, there is a lot more to it. Then I started reading. And the more you read, the more you come to understand. And so I think anyone, whenever it comes to your bubble of consciousness, you're accountable at that point.
Right. I always say I had a life-changing experience when it comes to working with the Anishinaabe people. I had First Nations people, I should say. I had a great opportunity to work with Turtle Concepts as guest facilitator, and we went through 4 different reserves, and we did boot camps with the young kids, and then we'll do workshop with the adults. And when I left, it just totally changed. Because you get to so I'm at university reading and studying all of this stuff, and then you get to do that. You get to really experience tangibly what's going on. I remember going to one reserve, and we went to the school to do some workshop, and I think there was 29 students in the high school there, and only one of them graduated. And the impact of those type of things sit with me for a long. One of the things that stood out to me at one of the places I was going, so we stayed outside of the reserve and then drove into the reserve. Outside of the reserve, people were swimming in the water and everything like that and playing at the beach. And you go to the reserve, and that area of water is polluted. In the school, we talk about water, in the school, you were told that you can't wash your hand at the pipe within the school. Like, I mean, how is that? One of my big discussion, I'm very opinionated, I'm not afraid to speak my mind. In my university class, when we'll try to have these discussions, and they will come around talking about third world countries, and it was interesting the opinions that people had about third world countries and where we were located. And I had to stop them a couple of times, and I said, you know what, I can tell you, I grew up in a third world country. I said, but I can tell you, the experience that I've seen from First Nations people suffer in this country is worse than in a third world country. So it's interesting how again that assumption or that ignorance come from, that they take on the mantle of I'm better. That's right. I know you have a beautiful daughter,
I do.
right? And I didn't hear you say anything about your daughter or your husband.
That's true too.
Yeah, so you got to give them some love, man. Like, I mean,
We are still in very good terms. I just want to put this out. We are in very good terms
you're in good
still.
terms?
But you know what? This is really funny because it's having those multi-layered or intersectional identities.
Yes.
It's sometimes it's really like to define yourself, and I find I do that a lot. I cut out sections of my identity because it's just like so much to unpack in one statement. That's or whatever. Right. I think I'm still not used to the motherhood and the being a wife 6 years into it.
Wow.
Because like I never defined myself, and part of it too, I didn't take my husband's last name too, so it's never like I've always been myself. And so that's funny. Thank you for bringing that up. But yes, I do have a 2-year-old daughter. She's everything her father, and they're twins. I just cook and provide physical support and making sure that they're comfortable so they can be happy together. We have a very interesting family actually because my husband's family, his mother is Austrian and his father is Egyptian.
Interesting.
And they met in Thunder Bay, of all places in Canada, right?
Yeah.
And they had him and his sister. And I am Sudanese, and so we're having a mini United Nations in our home.
There you go.
Right? It's growing. So. Well,
our household, we have we always talk about our 5 multiracial kids, right? And you know, they all bring different thing to the table.
For sure.
So you mentioned a piece there which is one of my favorite sociological theory, intersectionality.
Yes.
Because a lot of time when we talk about an issue, we always look at it from one lens. But there is so much social determinants of whatever that thing that we're, from a multiracial perspective. Yeah. What has been your experience now that you have a daughter? Like, you know, we talk about now, you've heard my daughter present about navigating that interracial, you know, you're not black enough, you're not white enough. Yep. I watched a documentary in my university class. It was called Living in the Hyphen. And it was a powerful documentary because it was the same thing. People talking about like Chinese Canadian talking about when they go to China, they were white, and then when they're here, they're Chinese. Yep. What has been your experience? I mean, I know like you're still navigating some of that. Anything you want to share from that space?
I think actually to me it's not maybe fear. Maybe it is fear. Maybe I should acknowledge that it's a fear. But I do have a fear that, and maybe it's coming from a place of fear, but being in multi-racial family, I always want to make sure that my daughter is very fair skinned, right? Maybe she's tan these days because of the summer, but she's compared to me, she's white, right? And so I want to make sure I instill blackness in her. Right? Because I think that's a really huge part of her identity. And I don't want her to grow up to the age of 18 and 19 and she is not black enough and not white enough and she's in between, right? And she had already made assumptions about her identity that do not match. Yes. Right? And unfortunately that the outside view on yourselves is also part of how you socialize and internalize your identity, right? And so I tried to expose her to my culture, right, and to my traditions, to have her carry that with her as part of our identity. It's all of me, right? Yeah. So I share that with her, and my fear is that she grows up, because in my life I have met a lot of people that are their parents, they're Japanese or they're Arab or whatever. And they grow up and they don't speak the language, or they don't know enough about the culture, and they get to a point where it's almost like an identity crisis, right? Yeah, that the society reminds you that you are not the mainstream white. That's right. You are not, right? And so you get reminded of that, and you find yourself, well, if I'm not this, and I know nothing about that, what am I?
Yeah.
Right? And so I'm really, like, this is one of the things that I'm very conscious about when it comes to raising her, is making sure that she is comfortable in this tradition and in this. And then she can choose. She can identify as Hawaiian if she wants to when she grows up, whatever they do at that time.
Yeah.
But at least she has that foundation when she's growing up is very important to me.
I think that's really huge, right? I think that's really, really important from a multiracial perspective. You know, my daughter, she's really open and into this. So we sit down and we have rich conversation from that space. And it pains my heart sometimes to hear the struggles and stuff like that, that she has to deal with, right? So that's the reason why, again, as you said, to create those space, platform, foundation for her, that she has grounded herself in a true identity, because she's not going to get away from society pointing out to her that she's not black enough or she's not white enough. And how do you navigate that? It's by being strong and grounded in who you are, right? So thank you for sharing that, because that's an important piece. We know that we have to do a piece from a courageous conversation perspective strictly around multiracial families and how that goes, because
I would love to hear it.
That's a big piece. Me and Shauna is planning to do one just as a couple, because there is that piece as well, right? Like, how dare you have the good looking black man, right? Or how, you know, that
you're the good looking black man? Okay, just making sure we're talking about the same black man. I'm kidding.
So that kind of stuff, right? I mean, and there is, you know, from an Akano perspective, the work that we do. By the way, I want to back up.
Yes.
Thank you so much for what you have bring to Akano.
Oh, you're welcome.
You have, what you brought to Akano, you were able to, it's what we needed at the time to get to the next step. Because for me, I'm a progressive person. I can't handle being stagnant and don't feel nothing is moving. I get bored and I'm done.
Yeah.
Okay? And I love what you've, I was just saying to someone, I think this morning or yesterday, the bridge that you created for us, for the Muslim community, and to really invite and make that other side of our brothers and sisters integrated and an active member within the Akana group has been magnificent. We need more bridge builders and, you know, agents of change like you.
Thank you.
That is required for the next step, because we have created a great foundation and a great space, but now we really need to start moving to the next level, right? So your contribution is not, it's not, it's really important. And I personally, if you haven't heard it from me, really appreciate that. And I know that makes a big difference for us of who we are. And I think we have greater things to come. So I'm hoping that you have some conversation for me as we stretch this out. We're going to try to wrap up a little bit, because I think our conversation was good. And I think between me and you, we have a follow-up conversation that we're going to have at some point.
Okay. Okay.
If you are to make a suggestion to, we know when we try to have these conversations about race or even residential school or anything, the first thing that you get, sometimes you get just absolute silence or denial. Defensiveness. What is your recommendation to someone who said, I never knew, or get quiet, or get uncomfortable? Do you have any suggestion that you will suggest for that? We know what we did when we would hear these conversations, but the difference is we were not uncomfortable or denying that these things was present. We were just interested and we went to check them out. So what would you suggest?
I think so when it comes to the silence and defensiveness and denial, is because people try to disassociate, right? So like, I am not usually the one I hear, I'm not a racist,
right? And
then they will name the few diverse people that they would know, and you're like, okay, stop there. So like, you know, they're like, I'm not a racist, or I am not, or I, you know, we work hard in this country, and me and my great and grandfather and whoever in the tree is that has been hardworking and tax paying, that they haven't hurt anyone. Or so people try to say, and it's something that you really want to distance yourself from, right? Like if I come from a family of slave owners, I would definitely want to like cut ties as soon as I became aware of it, right? So definitely. So I think people who are on our side should have that sympathy and understanding.
That's right.
That it's a really difficult place to put someone in.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So knowing that, then I'll give them the grace to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And for the people who are uncomfortable, know that I am not calling you a racist unless you are. And unless I'm calling you a racist, right? Because so if I'm having a conversation so we can move forward, it's not because I am accusing you of being a racist.
Right.
It's because without having this conversation, you can change your behavior that could be harmful, and you can have awareness to be. You won't have the awareness to be a better person, even though you're a good person now. But you can be better.
Absolutely.
Right.
We all can.
So exactly. So I think the people need to know, just because we're talking about a history or current events that involve people from your race, you should be able to sit with that discomfort, because we have been sitting with it.
That's right.
For about, I don't know how many years, right? Right? You sit, and I sit and I exist in places where all Muslims are terrorists.
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm like, do I have to really make my allegiance to the Queen now? And right?
Yeah.
And as a black person, you exist, and as black people, we exist in spaces where there's all that stereotypes that could be thrown around us, but we're expected to sit with that discomfort. So why can't you sit with the same discomfort that something that people you're related to by a billion of years ago, but we're still living it today, and you're still benefiting from today. So sit with that comfort, take your time with it.
That's right. And
unfortunately, you can't be comfortable and progress.
It's funny,
you have to be uncomfortable.
It's interesting that you said that, because this is what this book here is talking about.
What is
it? Is that when you start having those conversations, right, and you feel anything, that's one of his suggestions. Sit with that and see how it feels in your body. And then ask yourself, why? Why am I feeling that way? Why is this making me feel that way? Right? Instead of running away from it, because running away from it is it's not allowing you to move. But you're right. I heard somebody said the other day, it's exhausting to be black.
It is.
Because it's nonstop. Well, first of all, we believe in meditation, me and my wife, and it's a big piece of who we are, because I personally recognize in a massive way, your generational traumas that you just carry with you all the time, and you have to do something beyond the regular medicating yourself, or you really have to. I always say you literally have to get out of your mind sometime to really connect to a space or something that is bigger than you. And so, it's exhausting too. So there is those things that are present all the time. And if you don't have something to connect to, you're just on that boat all the time, right? It's hard. It's hard. So I want to wrap up the conversation, though. So I want to thank you, Rimaz, for coming on with Courageous Conversation today. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share as we wrap up this conversation?
I think we covered a lot of grounds, and it was a very enriching and wide-ranging conversation that we've had. It's always a pleasure speaking with you, you know that. And even though sometimes we don't always agree, I know it might seem like we're in agreement, but maybe because this is something really touches both of us, and even though our experiences are different, yet they are based on the same, they come from the same place, right? So it's always a pleasure speaking with you, even if, and when we do agree with each other. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I saw a quote the other day that says, because I disagree with you doesn't mean that I hate you. Right? And I think that's if we are to share a suggestion to people who have difficulty having these difficult conversations, right? That's the thing. In spite that we are trying to have a difficult conversation, that doesn't mean that I have a hatred towards you or really trying to, put you in a negative spot. I'm just saying that these conversations need to have. Thank you again. It's actually been a pleasure having this conversation. I know that this would have been we don't have enough time, but because we can do this for a long period of time. But for me, it's always a pleasure. It's another episode of Courageous Conversation. This one I think is going to put us on a new level. And it's Thank you for everyone who always support Courageous Conversation. You know that you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on YouTube. You can also send me an email at courageousconversation9@gmail.com. courageousconversation9@gmail.com. And remember, have courageous conversation. It can save your life. Thank you.
Thank you.